At a glittering gala where wealth and power reign, one unassuming woman enters the room with nothing but worn shoes and a frayed coat. Yet, her presence will shatter everything the elite thought they knew about success, and the revelation will leave them in shock. The Metropolitan Museum of Art stood resplendent under the dazzling New York City lights. The gala, an event coveted by the city's elite, was in full swing. People who shaped the very fabric of society, powerful businessmen, renowned artists, and high-profile socialites gathered beneath its majestic roof. The marble floors reflected the glint of countless champagne glasses as laughter and clinking of crystal filled the air. But amid the splendor and sophistication, there was a sense of deliberate separation. The glitzy facade of this world served not only as a symbol of wealth, but also a barrier, dividing the powerful from the powerless. Catherine Winters, the epitome of grace and authority, moved through the room like a queen in her kingdom. Her crimson gown, perfectly tailored to hug her every curve, shimmered under the soft glow of the chandeliers. A diamond necklace, the kind that could buy an entire neighborhood, rested against her neck, catching the light with every movement. Her eyes sparkled with calculated brilliance, her smile an effortless display of charm. Catherine was at home here, among the city's finest, a woman who had clawed her way to the top. This world of privilege, of influence, was the world she had mastered. She moved fluidly through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with the same people who made fortunes on others' backs. Eleanor Madison, her closest confidant and a renowned fashion designer, stood by her side. Eleanor's velvet black dress, adorned with a sleek silver belt, was as breathtaking as her cold, calculating gaze. Next to them, Patricia Reynolds, a wealthy heir to a technology empire, sipped her champagne with an air of superiority. The three women were bound not only by shared wealth but by a deep understanding of power. They had earned their place in the world, or so they believed. They had sacrificed, conquered, and outshone the competition. Together, they were untouchable. Catherine's world was one of immaculate perfection. Every gesture was deliberate, every word calculated. In this ballroom, the poor, the forgotten, and the less fortunate were invisible. They didn't belong. They couldn't possibly. No one who walked into this glittering world could do so without the right pedigree, the right attire, the right connections. Everyone knew their place. It was the law of nature in these circles. But as Catherine adjusted her sapphire earrings, her gaze wandered across the room to the entrance. The doors, grand and imposing, creaked open, and a low murmur spread like wildfire. Guests turned their heads as if on cue, curiosity sweeping through the crowd. A figure had entered, and yet it was not the familiar face of another wealthy philanthropist, nor a celebrity stepping out of the shadows. It was an old woman, dressed simply, and her presence felt jarring in contrast to the extravagance around her. Mary Thomas, the elderly black woman, stood at the threshold, her frail form almost lost in the towering opulence of the museum. She wore a faded beige coat, the fabric frayed at the edges, as if it had weathered decades of hardship. Her shoes, worn and patched, seemed out of place against the polished marble floors. The handbag she carried had long since lost its color, its leather cracking from age. Yet, despite the visible signs of wear, Mary held herself with quiet dignity. Her silver hair was neatly tucked beneath a modest hat, and her eyes held a depth of wisdom and experience that seemed to transcend the material world surrounding her. At first, the room was silent, but then, like an echo bouncing off cold walls, the whispers began. They were hushed at first, barely audible, as guests exchanged fleeting glances. But as the elderly woman walked deeper into the room, the whispers grew louder, more pointed. There was no mistaking the judgment in their tone, the silent sneers wrapped in polite smiles. "Who invited her?" Patricia Reynolds scoffed, her voice barely above a whisper. but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Her eyes narrowed in contempt as she glanced at Eleanor, who shrugged with indifference. Eleanor's lips curled into a smile that barely concealed her distaste. Probably a mistake. Someone's probably doing the charity thing, inviting a token guest to make themselves feel better, she said, her words laced with sarcasm. Catherine remained silent, her eyes fixed on the woman in the doorway. She had not expected this. The old woman's very presence felt like an affront to everything Catherine had worked so hard to build. It wasn't just the disheveled coat or the worn shoes. It was the fact that this woman dared to walk into a space reserved for the city's finest, as if she, too, belonged here. Catherine watched Mary as she slowly made her way through the room, her small figure moving with a quiet strength that seemed to defy the judgment surrounding her. The whispers grew louder, but Mary did not flinch. She did not seem to hear the veiled insults, nor the mocking glances. She simply walked with purpose, a steady pace that seemed almost deliberate. And that, more than anything, unnerved Catherine. Her thoughts were interrupted by Eleanor, who leaned in to speak. "I wonder if she knows where she is," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Maybe she's lost. She certainly doesn't belong here." "Definitely not," Patricia added with a smirk. "Maybe the hotel made a mistake. Can you imagine letting someone like that into a room like this?" Catherine's gaze flickered back to Mary, who had paused at the far end of the room, surveying the scene with a calm that only seemed to irritate Catherine more. There was something about the way Mary carried herself, something that suggested she was not bothered by the superficial judgments being made around her. And then, with a voice that cut through the chatter like a knife, Catherine spoke aloud. "Maybe we should double-check the guest list," she suggested, her tone dripping with condescension. Her voice was deliberately loud enough for those around her to hear, an assertion of authority in a room full of people who revered such power. "It seems there's been a mistake." Her words rippled through the crowd like a wave, and Catherine could feel the collective gaze of the room shift toward the woman who dared to defy their expectations. It wasn't just about appearance anymore. It was about power, about who had the right to be there. But despite the uncomfortable glances, despite the murmurs and judgments, Mary remained composed. She moved slowly through the crowd, seemingly unbothered by the stares. Her smile, though faint, was warm, as though she were accustomed to the ridicule, as though she had long ago learned that the opinions of others had no bearing on her own worth. As the evening stretched on, Catherine's discomfort began to grow. She couldn't stop watching Mary. The old woman's quiet confidence seemed to challenge everything Catherine had ever believed in. She was the very embodiment of everything Catherine's world had been built to exclude: the poor, the unseen, the marginalized. Yet here she was, defying all expectations and moving with an elegance that was entirely her own. Catherine's mind raced. How could someone like her, someone who looked so out of place in this gilded world, hold herself with such dignity? It made no sense, and yet, as Mary continued her path through the ballroom, Catherine's mind couldn't help but wonder, who was she really? The answer, Catherine soon realized, was not something she was prepared to hear, but it would be a truth that would change everything. The room was filled with the sound of polite laughter and the clinking of glasses, but the mood had shifted. The entry of Mary Thomas had cast an undeniable shadow over the carefully curated atmosphere of New York's elite. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn between the world of those who belonged here and the one who had walked in, uninvited and out of place. The grandeur of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with its gleaming chandeliers and glittering guests, seemed to shrink in the presence of— Catherine Winters stood at the center of the room, her gaze locked on Mary, who now made her way deeper into the ballroom. Despite her calm exterior, Catherine felt an inexplicable tightening in her chest, a discomfort she could not shake. Her mind raced, her thoughts tangled with questions she didn't want to confront. Who was this woman? How dare she walk into a room so full of power and prestige with nothing more than faded shoes and a worn-out coat? Catherine didn't know it yet, but the answer to that, as the elderly woman moved through the room with unshakable grace, the whispers began. At first they were quiet, just a ripple of curiosity. But soon the murmurs swelled, growing louder and more biting as Mary's presence became an object of ridicule. It wasn't enough for the guests to simply stare. They had to make their judgments known, to reinforce the boundaries between the haves and the have-nots. This was their world, and no one had the right to cross that line unless they had earned it, unless the Patricia Reynolds, never one to hold her tongue, was the first to speak. Her voice, sharp and laced with disdain, carried through the air. "Who is she?" she whispered to Eleanor, her eyes scanning Mary from head to toe. "She doesn't even look like she knows where she is. I mean, really, how did she even get in?" Eleanor, ever the calm and calculating one, didn't even need to look in Mary's direction. She knew exactly what Patricia meant. A mistake, I'm sure. Probably one of those charity invitations they send out to make themselves look good, she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. It's embarrassing, honestly. Catherine listened, her thoughts clouded with a mixture of irritation and disbelief. How could someone so clearly out of place, so entirely mismatched for this world, have the audacity to walk into it? Catherine's world was one of elegance, one of strict social codes. She had worked so hard to earn her place here, to belong to this circle of privilege and power. And yet, here was someone who seemed to defy everything Catherine believed in. Mary, oblivious to the judgments being cast upon her, continued to move through the ballroom. Her steps were slow and measured, as if she had all the time in the world. The people who surrounded her, those who had once been so caught up in their own refined conversations, now shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flickering between each other and the elderly woman. Some offered forced smiles, while others didn't even bother to hide their contempt. The air was thick with whispers, each more malicious than the "Look at her," Patricia sneered, her eyes narrowing. "She's got to be some kind of housekeeper or something. Probably lost her way trying to find the staff entrance." Her laugh was low, almost cruel, but no one seemed to care. They had all heard worse, and for the most part, they agreed. Eleanor nodded in agreement, though her expression remained unreadable. It's a shame, really. They let anyone in these days. It's supposed to be a high-profile charity event, but instead we have this spectacle. Catherine's face, usually so composed, betrayed a flicker of irritation. She could feel the heat of her own anger rising, not just at Mary's presence, but at the audacity of the guests around her to speak so openly, so shamelessly about someone they didn't even know. And yet, she didn't speak up. She didn't defend the old woman. Catherine was too caught up in the venomous energy that had swept through the room. It was easy to join in the mockery, to feel superior. After all, who was she to challenge the... But as she watched Mary's unbothered demeanor, something in Catherine shifted. For all the scorn being heaped upon her, Mary was unwavering. She didn't shrink back, didn't apologize for her presence. There was a quiet strength in her that Catherine could not ignore, and it disturbed her in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. Catherine leaned in toward Eleanor, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think she knows who we are?" she asked, her tone laced with both confusion and a strange sense of insecurity. The question felt absurd, but she couldn't help but ask it. "I mean, she can't possibly think she belongs here." Eleanor chuckled softly, her eyes flickering back toward Mary. "Of course not. But that's the problem, isn't it? She doesn't even know her place. She's not like us. She doesn't understand how things work in this world." Catherine nodded, but her mind remained focused on Mary. She didn't look like the woman everyone had assumed her to be. She didn't act as though she were out of place. The more Catherine tried to dismiss her, the more she was drawn to her. It was like a magnet, pulling her against her will, forcing her to confront something she wasn't ready to face. Mary paused near the center of the ballroom, her eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. She didn't seem to notice the eyes on her, or if she did, she didn't care. She continued to move with a grace that seemed entirely at odds with her appearance, a confidence that made Catherine uncomfortable. How could someone so seemingly insignificant hold themselves with such composure? How could she walk through a room of such power and not be fazed? Catherine's breath hitched in her chest as she found herself confronting the truth that had been growing inside her for the past few minutes. This woman, this old black woman who had nothing more than faded shoes and a frayed coat, was the one thing that none of them could control. She was an enigma, a force they couldn't ignore. Patricia, still sneering, turned toward Catherine with a questioning look. "Are you going to say something?" she asked. "I mean, surely someone should make it clear that she doesn't belong here." Catherine opened her mouth, the words on the tip of her tongue, but they didn't come. Instead, she found herself staring at Mary, who now stood near the grand staircase, as if waiting for something. The moment stretched on, the tension building in the room as everyone awaited a response from Catherine. But Catherine didn't respond. She couldn't. In that moment, it was as if the room had fallen into a strange kind of limbo. The judgment, the mockery, the cruelty that had been so freely thrown at Mary now seemed like a distant echo. Catherine realized too late that she had been a part of it, had participated in the very same system that had placed people like Mary on the outside, to be laughed at and discarded. She could feel the weight of her own complicity in the room. And yet, Mary remained unbroken. She stood tall, unshaken by the whispers, the ridicule, or the cold glares that came her way. She had nothing to prove to these people. She was not here to win their approval. In that quiet defiance, Catherine saw something she had never seen before: the true power of self-worth. For the first time in her life, Catherine wondered if it was she who didn't belong in this world. A world where people like Mary were cast aside, where wealth and status meant more than humanity. The realization hit her like a slap to the face, a truth she could not ignore. And as the evening wore on, Catherine couldn't shake the image of Mary's face from her mind. The calm, unwavering expression of a woman who had nothing to prove, and yet had everything they had lost. The evening had descended into a soft, glamorous hum, the kind that only a grand gala could produce. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the symphony of orchestral music, it all blended into a backdrop of superficial grace, each guest performing their part in a world defined by wealth, status, and privilege. Yet amidst the usual glitter, something had shifted in the atmosphere, a tension that had been slowly building ever since the arrival of Mary Thomas. Catherine Winters, her elegant posture and poise still as impeccable as ever, stood at the center of it all, a quiet storm brewing inside her. She had done what she was supposed to, smiled, exchanged pleasantries, reinforced her position at the top of the social ladder. But her thoughts were no longer with the people around her. No, they were with the elderly black woman who had somehow found her way into a world that had been carefully constructed to keep people like her out. Catherine tried to push the unease aside, but every time she glanced toward Mary, that gnawing discomfort would flare up again, uninvited and unsettling. It wasn't just the old woman's appearance, the faded coat, the worn shoes, the frayed handbag, that stirred something deep within Catherine. It was the certainty, the inner calm with which Mary carried herself. She had endured the insults, the mockery, the open disdain of those who claimed the power of the world. Yet, she had never flinched. She didn't shrink into the background as people like Catherine expected her to. No, she simply walked through it all with a quiet defiance that was, at once, strange and compelling. And for the first time in Catherine's life, she felt a piercing awareness, a realization that she was, perhaps, the one who didn't belong. Still, Catherine tried to push the thoughts aside. She was a woman of power, of success. She had earned her place in the world. But as the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, her internal battle continued, the unease now more like an itch she couldn't scratch. It was only when the announcement came, when the room quieted for the unveiling of the Evening Star benefactor, that Catherine realized just how much her life was about to change. The moment the host took to the stage, Catherine stood taller, the weight of the room's expectations settling back on her shoulders. She had always been at the center of attention at such events. It was where she belonged. The evening had been, up until now, a display of opulence, a parade of the city's most elite figures. She had expected the announcement to be as it always was, another high-profile benefactor, another wealthy donor with the name that rang with influence. But the moment the host began speaking, Catherine's sense of comfort slipped away. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host's voice rang out, filled with an emotion that she had never heard from him before. "We are here tonight to honor an extraordinary individual. This person, whose heart is as generous as their actions, has made a donation that will change the future of our beloved Children's Hospital. This donation, a staggering $50 million, is the largest gift our hospital has ever received." The words floated in the air for a moment, their weight growing heavier with each passing second. Catherine's gaze flicked to the stage, her mind racing. $50 million? Who could possibly make such a donation? And then it came, the name. "And it is my great honor," the host continued, "to announce that this donation comes from none other than Mrs. Mary Thomas." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face, as though the world had suddenly shifted on its axis. Mary Thomas, the same woman who had been mocked just hours ago by herself and her friends, the same woman who had looked so out of place among them. The shock hit her like a wave, her mind struggling to reconcile the reality before her. How could this be? The elderly woman, with her ragged clothes and faded appearance, how could she possibly have the means to give away such an incredible sum? The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by a few confused murmurs. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she glanced toward Mary, who now stood at the back of the room, her posture still impeccable, her presence quiet yet undeniable. She moved with the same calm grace she had shown earlier, her every step measured and unhurried. Catherine's eyes were fixed on her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of the revelation. She couldn't tear her gaze away as Mary began to make her way to the stage, her every movement filled with a quiet confidence that was both humbling and infuriating. Catherine watched, as if in a trance, as Mary ascended the stage and took her place beside the host, who was beaming with pride. The applause began, slow at first, hesitant, as though the room were still grappling with the truth of what had just been revealed. But as Mary stood there, her composed and serene expression never wavered. The applause grew louder, more genuine. Catherine stood frozen, her mind swirling in disbelief. Everything she had assumed about Mary had been wrong. This woman, whom she had dismissed as an insignificant outsider, was more powerful than she could have ever imagined. Catherine's chest tightened, and she felt a pang of something she had never experienced before: regret. It was fleeting, but it cut deep. How could she have been so blind, so caught up in the trivialities of status and wealth? How had she, someone who prided herself on her ability to read people, missed the truth? The applause began to fade, and Mary was finally handed the microphone. As she spoke, her voice was steady, calm, and clear, cutting through the hushed silence that had fallen over the room. "I don't stand before you today to seek recognition or praise," she began, her eyes sweeping over the audience with an undeniable strength. "I stand here because I believe in what is good, in what is right. I believe in the power of kindness and in the necessity of helping those who need it most. My donation today is not about wealth or status. It is about giving back, about ensuring that children, no matter their background, have access to the care they deserve. Catherine could feel her chest constricting as Mary spoke. It wasn't just her words, it was the strength with which she spoke them. Catherine had never seen someone so unshakable, so determined in the face of everything this world held dear. She felt her own doubts and insecurities rise to the surface, and for the first time, she questioned everything she had built her life upon. Mary continued, her words resonating deep within Catherine. True wealth does not lie in what we possess. It lies in what we give. And it is my hope that, in time, others will follow the example set here tonight, not for the sake of recognition, but for the sake of making a real difference. As the applause began again, this time much more heartfelt, Catherine felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she felt small. She had spent so long measuring her worth by the size of her bank account, by the number of people who bowed to her power. But now, standing in the presence of Mary Thomas, Catherine realized how hollow it all was. Mary's gaze met hers briefly, and in that moment, Catherine felt something she had never felt before, a deep sense of humility. The proud walls she had built around herself, the pride that had once defined her, began to crumble piece by piece. She had been so sure of herself, so convinced of her superiority, that she had failed to see the true value of the people around her. And then it hit her. The world she had spent so many years trying to conquer, the world of wealth, of status, of appearances, was meaningless. It was just a shell, a construct, a lie. What mattered, Catherine realized, was not the things she had, but the things she did. It was the kindness she gave, the lives she touched, and the love she spread. She had been chasing the wrong thing all along. As the applause died down, Catherine stood motionless, her mind racing. She had just witnessed a moment that would change the course of her life forever. And though the evening continued on, filled with the same glitz and glamour, Catherine knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The world she had built so carefully was no longer enough. She needed to change, to be better, to live in a way that truly mattered. The evening's glimmering facade had faded away as the guests slowly trickled out of the ballroom, the echoes of laughter and chatter no longer filling the grand halls. For Catherine Winters, the night that had started with such predictability, such certainty, had turned into something unrecognizable. The usual thrill she felt when surrounded by her peers, the same sense of power, of control, now felt hollow, empty, and unimportant. Catherine stood at the center of the ballroom, her eyes still fixed on the empty stage where Mary Thomas had stood moments ago, the impact of her words lingering in the air. Catherine had been a woman who prided herself on knowing what others were thinking. She could read a room, manipulate conversations, and play the game better than anyone else. But tonight had cracked that armor, exposing a vulnerability she had never dared acknowledge. She had spent years building a fortress around her life, a life defined by her wealth, her connections, and her place at the top. But standing in the quiet aftermath of the gala, she realized how fragile that fortress truly was. Her mind kept returning to Mary, the old woman, dressed in nothing more than a frayed coat and worn shoes, had turned the entire room upside down with a simple, quiet truth. She had given a donation, $50 million, a sum unimaginable to most. But that wasn't the revelation that had stunned Catherine. It wasn't the money. It was the way Mary had carried herself, her calm demeanor, and the power she emanated, not through her possessions, but through her actions, her unwavering principles, and her humility. Catherine had never met anyone like her. The champagne buzz in her system felt distant now, and Catherine's thoughts were clouded with a single question. How had she spent so many years blind to the true measure of success? How had she missed the essence of what it meant to truly matter? Catherine turned from the stage, her heart heavy with confusion and regret. She needed answers. She needed to understand how Mary had managed to rise above the superficiality of it all, how she had found peace in a world that valued nothing but wealth and appearance. Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that she had been living a lie, a truth so deep it terrified her. Without thinking, she moved toward the back of the ballroom, her heels clicking softly against the polished floors. The crowd had largely dissipated, but there, standing by the exit, was Mary. She was alone, her gaze soft but steady, as if she were waiting for something or someone. Catherine's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of admiration and something else she couldn't quite identify stirring inside her. She had to speak to her. She had to understand. "Mrs. Thomas," Catherine said, her voice tentative, unsure of how to begin. The words felt foreign, and she cursed herself for being so uncertain in her own skin. Mary turned slowly, her smile as serene as it had been on stage. It was a smile that conveyed understanding, compassion, and something else, a deep, unshakable peace that Catherine could only envy. "Miss Winters," Mary replied, her voice warm, devoid of the judgment that Catherine had expected. "You look lost," she said gently, the words simple but resonant. Catherine swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. I I don't know what's happened tonight," she admitted, her voice faltering for the first time. "I thought I understood the world. I thought I understood what mattered. But now, I don't know what to think." Mary's eyes softened and she took a step forward, her presence somehow both commanding and calming. She was a woman who had lived through unimaginable challenges, yet stood before Catherine without bitterness, without resentment. "You're not alone in that feeling," she said. "I think we all come to a moment in life where we have to decide what we truly value. It's never easy, but it's necessary." Catherine felt a rush of emotion, something raw and untapped within her, surging to the surface. She had never allowed herself to feel vulnerable before, never let herself question the foundations of her life. But now, as she stood before Mary, she felt as if the walls she had carefully constructed for years were crumbling, piece by piece. "I've spent my entire life measuring myself against others," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I built my worth on my name, my wealth, the things people admired me for. But now, it feels meaningless, like it was all just smoke and mirrors." She paused, feeling the weight of her own words. "I don't know how to change. I don't even know where to begin." Mary nodded slowly, as if she understood all too well the pain behind Catherine's words. "It's not easy to unlearn the things we've been taught to believe," she said. "We live in a world that teaches us to value what we have rather than who we are. But the truth is, none of the things you've been chasing will ever give you what you truly seek. Peace, purpose, connection. That only comes from within." Catherine's breath caught in her chest. "I don't know if I'm capable of that kind of change," she confessed, her voice trembling with the weight of the realization that she had built her life on a fragile foundation. How do I, how do I let go of everything I've worked for, everything that defines me?" Mary's expression remained soft, unhurried, as though she had already traveled down the road Catherine was now standing at the foot of. "You don't have to let go of everything, but you have to decide what truly matters. Does your worth come from your possessions, your status, your appearance? Or does it come from the love you give, the lives you touch, and the goodness you put into the world?" Catherine's heart ached as the truth of Mary's words hit her with full force. She had spent her entire life chasing after the wrong things, building a fortress out of wealth and influence, when the real treasure had always been something else entirely, something far more valuable and far more elusive. "I've been so blinded," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "I've been so consumed by the desire to prove myself, to be the best, to be more than everyone else." She closed her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. "But I've lost so much in the process. I've pushed people away. I've hurt people. I've built walls around myself and called it success." Mary stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Catherine's shoulder. The touch was warm, understanding. "The hardest part, Catherine, is not admitting our mistakes. It's forgiving ourselves and allowing ourselves the grace to grow. We can't change the past, but we can decide who we are from this moment forward. You have the power to choose a different path, one that is defined by kindness, humility, and the desire to do good. That's where true success lies." Catherine stood still, absorbing Mary's words, feeling a shift deep within her. It wasn't just an intellectual realization. It was an awakening, an understanding that had been buried beneath years of pride, of ambition, of arrogance. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and for the first time, Catherine saw the world for what it truly was. She saw her own life for what it truly was. "I want to change," Catherine whispered, the words full of determination and longing. "I want to make things right. I want to stop chasing after things that don't matter." The months that followed the gala marked a profound shift in Catherine Winter's life. What had begun as an evening of discomfort, confusion, and self-doubt had set into motion a transformation that would change the course of her existence. Catherine was no longer the woman she had been, the woman who had defined herself by wealth, status, and power. She had allowed herself to open her heart and mind, and in doing so, she had discovered something deeper, more meaningful than she could have ever imagined. At first, the change had been subtle. Catherine had started by distancing herself from the social circles that had once defined her. She stopped attending the extravagant parties, the lavish gatherings where the only currency was influence and wealth. She began to seek out quieter spaces, those filled with a different kind of richness, genuine human connection, compassion, and a deeper sense of purpose. The world she had once navigated with ease, where power and money were the keys to success, no longer held the same appeal. Her relationship with Mary Thomas became the cornerstone of her transformation. Mary, whose grace and strength had once been the subject of Catherine's scorn, had become her mentor, her guide, and her friend. Catherine learned to listen to Mary's wisdom, to understand the power of humility, and to accept the truth that true worth came not from what one possessed, but from the love one gave. Mary had shown her what it meant to live with authenticity, to make a real difference in the world without seeking recognition or reward. Catherine's first steps toward redemption were small but significant. She began to volunteer at the children's hospital that Mary had supported so generously. She worked alongside doctors, nurses, and volunteers, learning about the struggles of the children who came from backgrounds of poverty and neglect. The stories she heard broke her heart, but they also ignited a sense of purpose that Catherine had never known. She had spent so many years focused on the superficial, chasing after things that didn't matter. Now, she found herself driven by the desire to help those who truly needed it. One afternoon, as she was sitting with a young girl named Sophie, who had been battling leukemia for most of her life, Catherine felt a shift within herself. Sophie was only 9 years old, but her resilience, her unwavering courage in the face of unimaginable pain, inspired Catherine in ways she couldn't explain. Sophie's laughter, despite the pain she endured daily, was a reminder of the strength of the human spirit. Catherine found herself holding Sophie's hand, marveling at how a child so young could carry such a heavy burden with so much grace. Sophie's mother, a single parent who had been working multiple jobs to make ends meet, came into the room with a tired smile. Catherine had come to know her well over the past few weeks. She had seen firsthand the sacrifices made by parents who had nothing but love and hope to give. Sophie's mother had asked Catherine to help with a donation drive for other children in need, and Catherine had been more than willing. It was a small gesture, but it was a step in the right direction. Sitting there, in that small, sterile hospital room, Catherine realized how far she had come. She was no longer the woman who had walked into that gala, judgmental and arrogant, looking down on people who didn't fit into her carefully constructed world. Now she was someone who was learning to see beyond the surface, someone who was learning to care, not just out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to make a difference. Catherine's work at the hospital grew, and she began to take on more responsibility. She used her connections to raise funds for the children's care, advocating for them in ways she never would have considered before. The work was hard, but it was fulfilling. Every day, she learned more about the value of selflessness, the importance of kindness, and the power of community. But perhaps the most significant change came when Catherine began to open up to those she had once considered beneath her. She forged deep friendships with the volunteers, the nurses, and the families of the children she had been helping. She realized that she had been living in a bubble, surrounded by people who only cared about maintaining their status, their image. The real connections, the ones that mattered, were found in the most unexpected places. Her friendship with Mary deepened as well. Mary, ever the wise and humble woman, had always been there for Catherine, offering advice and encouragement when she needed it most. The two women spent long afternoons together, sharing stories of their lives, their dreams, and their struggles. Catherine learned from Mary that true strength didn't come from power, but from vulnerability. Mary had opened her heart to Catherine in a way no one ever had, and in return, Catherine found herself opening her heart to others. But redemption, Catherine soon learned, was not without its challenges. As she began to distance herself from the life she had once known, there were those who tried to pull her back into the world of opulence and privilege. Old friends, people she had once trusted and admired, began to distance themselves from her. They didn't understand the changes she was making. To them, Catherine's newfound humility seemed like a betrayal. They told her that she was wasting her potential, that she was throwing away everything she had worked so hard to achieve. "You're better than this," they would say. "You don't belong in this world. You were meant for bigger things." But Catherine no longer cared about what others thought. She had come to understand that true fulfillment came not from the approval of others, but from the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was doing the right thing. She had spent so many years measuring her worth by her wealth, her title, and the approval of the elite. But now, she measured her worth by the difference she was making in the lives of others. One day, as Catherine was walking out of the hospital, she was stopped by a nurse she had come to know well. The nurse, a young woman named Sarah, had been one of the first to welcome Catherine into the hospital community. She had seen the changes Catherine was making and had been one of her biggest supporters. "Catherine," Sarah said, her voice filled with warmth, "I just wanted to say thank you. You've inspired all of us. You've made us believe in something bigger than ourselves." Catherine's heart swelled at the words. She had never expected to be the one to inspire anyone, let alone a group of people who had been through so much themselves. "I haven't done anything," Catherine said, her voice soft. "I've just tried to do what's right." But Sarah shook her head. "No, you've done more than that. You've shown us that even someone like you, someone who had everything, can change. You've shown us that we're all capable of making a difference, no matter where we come from or what we've been through." The words hit Catherine like a wave, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly proud of herself, not for what she had achieved, but for the person she had become. She realized that her legacy would not be defined by the wealth she had accumulated or the social circles she had once run in. It would be defined by the lives she had touched, the love she had given, and the change she had inspired in others. Years later, as Catherine stood before a room full of volunteers, doctors, and families at the hospital, she knew that she had finally found her true calling. She had spent so much of her life chasing after the wrong things, measuring her worth by the wrong standards. But now, she was standing in front of people who had become her family, people who understood what truly mattered. And in that moment, she knew that her legacy, her real legacy, was one of love, kindness, and selflessness. As Catherine spoke to the crowd, she shared her story. She talked about the mistakes she had made, the lessons she had learned, and the power of redemption. She encouraged everyone in the room to never stop striving for better, to never stop changing, and to always remember that the value of a person lies not in what they have, but in what they give. And as the applause rang out, Catherine knew that she had finally found peace. She had found her purpose, not in the world she had once lived in, but in the world she had helped to create. A world where love, compassion, and kindness mattered more than anything else. Catherine's redemption was not just a personal journey, it was a journey that had touched the lives of many. And as she looked around the room at the faces of the people who had supported her, she realized that she had built something far more valuable than any fortune. She had built a legacy of love and hope, a legacy that would continue to inspire others for years to come. The story of Catherine Winters is one of remarkable transformation, from a woman defined solely by her wealth and status to someone who discovers the true meaning of success, purpose, and personal fulfillment. At the outset of her journey, Catherine was a person who measured herself by the size of her bank account, the power she held in social circles, and the admiration she received from others. She was admired for her sharp intellect, her ability to navigate the intricate world of the wealthy, and her enviable position in society. But her success was superficial, and her life was built on fragile foundations: wealth, appearances, and empty victories. It was only when she encountered Mary Thomas, the elderly woman she had once looked down upon, that Catherine's entire world began to unravel. Mary, with her humble demeanor, defied everything Catherine had ever believed. She was a woman of extraordinary generosity, living a life of quiet dignity, untouched by the superficialities of wealth and status. The stark contrast between Mary's true richness, her compassion, her selflessness, and her ability to inspire change stood in sharp contrast to Catherine's own life, which had been built on appearances and the accumulation of material possessions. Mary's donation to the Children's Hospital, her speech about true wealth, and her graceful presence in the face of mockery forced Catherine to confront her own values and beliefs. The evening at the charity gala, once a night of celebration and social performance, became the catalyst for Catherine's awakening. The realization that true worth comes from what one gives to others, not what one possesses, struck Catherine to her core. It was a revelation that shattered her old self-image and ignited the beginning of her transformation. In the weeks and months that followed, Catherine's journey was not an easy one. She began to distance herself from the circles that had once defined her. She let go of the toxic relationships that fed her ego, and instead, she turned her focus to something deeper. She started to volunteer at the very hospital where Mary had made her life-changing donation. Catherine worked alongside doctors, nurses, and volunteers, immersing herself in the world of those who had less but were rich in spirit, love, and resilience. Through this work, Catherine began to understand what true success meant. It was not about the number of zeros on a paycheck or the accolades one received at a gala. True success was found in the ability to love and give without expecting anything in return. True wealth lay in how one touched the lives of others, whether by offering a helping hand, providing comfort, or making a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. Catherine's perspective on life shifted dramatically. She no longer measured her worth by the luxury of her surroundings, but by the kindness she shared and the lives she affected. Her relationship with Mary blossomed over time. Mary, ever humble and wise, became not just a mentor but a friend. Catherine learned from her not just about generosity, but about the power of forgiveness, especially forgiving oneself. The inner peace Mary embodied was something Catherine longed for, and as their bond deepened, Catherine came to understand the profound impact of living with humility and authenticity. She realized that the power she had once sought was nothing more than a mirage. True power was found in the ability to be real, to be vulnerable, and to stand up for what was right. However, the road to redemption was not without its struggles. As Catherine distanced herself from her former life, she faced resistance from old friends and associates. People she had once relied on began to distance themselves from her. They saw her desire to change as a betrayal, a rejection of the world they had all been part of. But Catherine, now grounded in the values she had learned from Mary, refused to be swayed. She had tasted something more fulfilling than the shallow rewards of her old world. She had found the joy of living with purpose, with meaning, and with authenticity. Over time, Catherine's actions spoke louder than words. She continued to work at the hospital, raising funds and using her connections to help those in need. But more importantly, she became an example of the power of change. Her story became an inspiration to those around her, proving that no one was too far gone to turn their life around. Catherine's legacy was no longer defined by her wealth, but by the love and kindness she had cultivated in her heart and the lives she had touched along the way. One of the most powerful moments in Catherine's transformation was when she had the courage to look beyond her own achievements and focus on the achievements of others. The hospital became a place not just for healing but for growth, both for the patients and for Catherine herself. She realized that the people she helped, the children she supported, had something that she had once lacked, a deep sense of gratitude for the simple things in life. The joy in their hearts, despite the challenges they faced, reminded Catherine of what was truly important. In her final speech at the hospital, where she shared her story of transformation with the community, Catherine left behind a legacy that transcended material wealth. She spoke about the mistakes she had made, the lessons she had learned, and the importance of looking beyond the surface to see the true value in others. She urged the audience to take a moment to reflect on their own lives, to ask themselves what truly mattered, and to focus on making a difference in the world. Her journey was one of redemption, and the impact she left was immeasurable. Catherine Winters had gone from being a woman obsessed with status to someone who understood that real success came not from what you had, but from what you gave. The change she underwent and the legacy she left behind was a reminder to all that it is never too late to make a difference. Catherine Winters' story teaches us several profound lessons, each of which can be applied to our own lives regardless of our circumstances. First and foremost, Catherine's journey demonstrates that we all have the power to change. No matter how ingrained our habits or mindsets may seem, change is always possible if we choose to reflect on our actions, embrace humility, and learn from our mistakes. Catherine's decision to move away from the superficial pursuit of wealth and status and toward a life of service and generosity exemplifies the importance of self-reflection and growth. The key takeaway is that we can always redefine our sense of purpose, no matter where we start. The second lesson is the importance of seeing beyond appearances. Catherine's initial judgment of Mary Thomas, based solely on her outward appearance, led her down a path of shallow thinking and misplaced values. It was only when she opened her heart and mind to the truth behind Mary's actions that Catherine began her real journey toward personal fulfillment. In our own lives, it's crucial that we avoid making snap judgments based on external factors. Every person has a story, and by seeking to understand them deeply, we can find opportunities to connect, learn, and grow. Lastly, Catherine's story underscores the power of generosity and kindness. It is not the amount of wealth we accumulate that defines us, but the difference we make in the lives of others. Whether it's offering a helping hand to someone in need, volunteering our time, or simply being kind to those around us, our acts of compassion have the power to change the world. Catherine's redemption came not from accumulating more wealth, but from giving of herself, offering her time, resources, and love to those who truly needed it. As we reflect on Catherine's story, we should ask ourselves how we can apply these lessons in our own lives. Are we too caught up in the pursuit of wealth, status, or material possessions? Do we judge others based on their appearance or circumstances rather than seeking to understand their true worth? Are we living with purpose, using our resources and talents to make a positive impact on the world around us? By embracing these lessons, we can shift our focus from external achievements to internal growth, from what we have to what we give. We can begin to build deeper, more meaningful relationships with others, and we can work toward creating a legacy that is not defined by the things we own, but by the love and kindness we share with the world. Change, grow in your own life, and focus on making a positive impact. Then, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll not only support us, but also stay connected with our ongoing content designed to inspire, challenge, and encourage you to live a life of purpose. Your support means the world to us and fuels our desire to create more stories, lessons, and content that can make a difference in your life. Thank you for being part of this journey with us, and remember, transformation starts with a single step.